like drowning. It's not something compact or concrete that you can carry on your back. It's a subsuming pressure that converges on all sides until your ears ring, but you can't hear, and your lungs pulse, but you can't breathe. But even from these depths, I see a rippled vision of the light. And all I have to do is reach out my hands to meet it. Let the water lift me toward the surface where I can breathe, float. Then the same force that now surrounds me will carry me upon its back. Awake, O sleeper, rise from the depths, and Christ will shine on you.
How many of you believe that you still have some things that God wants you to enter that you haven't entered yet? Well, tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk to you about some things that are necessary in order for you and I to actually realize why God did what he did and what he meant when he did it. There are some times that I think, I don't know about you, but there are times when I think that, why did God put us here if there's so much pain, so much poverty, so much sickness and disease? I mean, could that be what God had in mind when he created us? Could he have had in mind that he really wanted to put us in a position where we never lived with quite enough? That we really had to push our way through things in order to be able to just make ends meet? To frustrate us completely, to have our families not be able to have the kind of things that they need, our kids not to have all of the things that you want to help your children with? Is that what God had in mind? I somehow don't think so. I somehow am convinced of the fact that when God created us, he took the man that he placed in the garden. He didn't place him in a desert, but he placed him in a garden which he planted. And one of the first things that God ever did when he took him for a tour in this 6,000 square mile area was that he took him over into the land of Havilah where there was gold. And he said, and the gold here is good. Now you need to understand something about that, is that gold didn't really mean anything. They didn't have a monetary system whereby an individual could trade and do commerce by having gold and then trading the gold for different commodities. They didn't have that. But he showed Adam where the gold was, and he told him, he said, Adam, whatever you like. How many of you like shiny things? You like shiny things. You really do. I mean, we do. You know, God created you to like shiny things. All you need to do is look at someone who's fishing, and you'll understand exactly the way that you feel about things. You see this shiny bait that's going through the water that they're trolling with this thing, and they're reeling this thing in, and that shiny thing that goes in front of that fish has got to eat that shiny thing. He's got to have it. And men and women are the very same. Do you know, I've found by taking a look at the scriptures that God never really thinks much about how much you have. He only thinks about the people that you didn't care for with what you had. He doesn't talk about that, you know, you shouldn't have had that, you know. He talks about what you didn't share. I've never found him to say, well, you know what, I'll tell you what. you don't want to make anybody else feel bad or jealous. And so what you need to do is you need to live impoverished in order so other people don't feel really bad because of what I've done for you. He's thought the contrary to all of that. He didn't want us to drag anyone else down that he was touching. He wanted those that he touched to bring up those that have yet to have entered in. He wants us to pull people up. The whole idea of life is that people would pull others down. Most relationships that you have drag other people to the ground. But is in the relationship arena where God is at, in his economy, we're to take people up, not to drag them down. Man's economy is the opposite. They drag people down. When you think of an individual that walks in a room, you think, what a bummer, look who's here. I can't get it. This person's just kind of, I'm getting bummed out. This individual is just kind of like bumming me out. So how many of you then believe that God intended for you to live in lack? Okay, then how many of you believe that God intended for mankind to live with more than enough? Raise your hand if that's true. Is that true or not true? That's really true. I mean, if you believe that's true, say yes. Yes. Okay, that's so true. It's really true. I know that that's true. I know him. I've never heard him ever say, I'll tell you what, that guy is just acting too blessed. I've never heard that, and I don't want to be facetious or contrary or sarcastic about any of that. It's that I've never heard him ever. Even Solomon. Do you know what he told Solomon? He said, Solomon, I would have given you more. I'd have given you more. More. Give Solomon more. Give Solomon more. I'm going to give you more. He says to David. Now remember David. David was the guy who gave to God in one offering in order to build the temple. David gave to God one offering from being a shepherd boy and 35 years later being the king. He said, out of my own treasury. And when you add up what he gave, it was 115 billion US dollars in one offering. He never said to David, I'll tell you what, if I'd have known you had that money before, I never would have given you any of that stuff. I would have never done that. And I thought, as I went over it, what has happened to us is that instead of all of us as believers becoming God-centered in our faith, we've become man-centered in unbelief. Is that we start thinking that because one person didn't get healed, we don't think anybody's going to get healed. We start thinking that when one person didn't get blessed, it didn't seem like they got their prayer answered, then nobody's going to get their prayer answered. Because look at man, because if honestly, if anyone was going to get their prayer answered, they would have been the one to get their prayer answered. When that isn't really true. What's really true is that the reason for people's prayers being answered or not being answered, it really has to do not necessarily with the term belief, because people turn around and they start using this by saying, well, they didn't have enough faith, but that isn't it. You have to define it. Do you know what it is? That wrong feelings bombarded them day after day, to where what they began to expect was that it was not good that was going to come. It was evil that was at their doorstep. And they were saying with their mouth, well, I believe God. I believe in God. And if anyone ever spoke to them about it, they would absolutely rebuke them over the fact. But if in fact what we do is that I say with my mouth that I believe God, but in my heart I believe that things are kind of tough. It's just not going to work out. Guess what happens? You think that God didn't answer my prayer, when really He did, because we get what we expect. And if I don't expect to make it, I don't make it. And so tonight, I want to just take a few moments. Since none of us believe that God is intended for us to lack, the number one need inside this room is for money. All right, let me ask you. How many of you in here are not a Christian? You are not a Christian. You came to church tonight because the air conditioning in your car wasn't working and you kind of figured these people look like they got air con. Anybody? Okay. All right, that one's gone. Okay, next. How many of you actually are going to die this week of a terminal disease? You're going to die this week. You know you're going to die. This week is your week. You're checking out. Everything is over. You know you've already signed over all the stuff. You know this week you're done. Anybody? Come on now. Don't be afraid. God didn't give you the spirit of fear. Really. Anybody? Nobody. I don't know. You know, it seems like we spend so much of our time talking to people about things they never need. We talk to them about salvation. They don't need it. I mean, why? I'm already a Christian. You know, in time, the more you follow Jesus, you might start thinking, you know, I believed in God, but now I've come to the point to where I believe God. I mean, things are going to change the more that you pursue God. They just do. But now, let me ask you this. How many of you in this room, just be honest, don't be shucking me about anything. But how many of you could just be honest that you would just say it, and I'd just say it. I'll tell you, I'll keep my head down for the first half a second because I got to see it. Ready? How many of you could use some more money? Raise your hand. Okay. Nope. All right, that just about takes in everybody. Then why is it that when we begin to talk about it, that's the very subject that bothers people? You know why? Because you got an owie. It's like if one of your children think that you're going to touch their owie, you get anywhere close to that owie, they're screaming before you ever get there. I mean, it's just that, don't touch it. No, Mommy, no, Mommy, no. And you're thinking, gosh, kid, it's only a scratch. You know, I mean, what are you doing? Don't get anywhere near that. Don't touch my owie. And so I understand this. If you and I have been created for blessing, we've been created to be blessed, I had to ask myself, then what's up with that? What does all that mean? Then I figured this out, that hell has a plan. Hell's plan is for you to believe that God has destined some people to be rich and some people to be poor. And there's not anything that can be done about it. There's not anything that can be done. But never forget this, that the most celebrated demon in all of hell was the one that was assigned by the devil himself to tell you and to convince you that God wanted you to be poor. Because if you don't have any money, you can't help anybody. If you don't have any money, you can't sleep well. If you don't have any money, you think, what in the world good am I going to be able to do? If you don't have any money, how in the world are you going to go to all the world and preach the gospel to every nation? If you don't have any money, how can you even send anybody to go anywhere? You can't. Because you have to get your bills paid. So the biggest demon in your life is the one that's trying to tell you that God doesn't want you to have anything. Because if he can convince you that God doesn't want you to have anything, then at that point, he has rendered you inoperative even though he cannot kill you. He has fought you to a neutral point. So guess what we do? We then build a fort and a campsite around our neutral point to where, no, I don't believe it, because if God wanted us to have anything, I'd be the person that adds something. I agree with you. I don't disagree. But I'm telling you what, if in fact that when you were inside of kindergarten, if they didn't teach you your ABCs, you didn't go to first grade. And if you didn't go to first grade, guess where you still were? In kindergarten. And if you didn't learn your ABCs that year, you could probably be in kindergarten for 3-4 years before they ever kind of decided to be able to pass you on. And that's exactly what has happened in the church, is that people have not learned the things that they need to learn, and after a number of years, we just had to pass them to the next class, whether or not that they knew anything. So we had to push them on. We had to give them a diploma, but they couldn't read. We call them elders of the church, and they're just a bunch of schmucks. That's what we call them, because they didn't grow. They didn't take the time that it took in order to beat the devil square out of their life in areas where he needed to be kicked out of. And one of those areas is in the area of finances. On my way here tonight, I was speaking to Rick Renner on the phone, and he said, can you send me these things? Because I was talking to him about the very thing that I think that the church needs to have at this point. I love you, but you don't need biblical knowledge. What you need is a tutor. This tutor needs to tell you what it is that you need to have action upon, not to learn another song from children's church. I cannot imagine. I have lived and stood in front of people for 35 years, standing right here. We should be running the world. What are we going to do? Not what are we going to believe. It's what am I going to do now? In Psalm 35, verse number 27, he said, let them shout for joy and be glad, them that favor my righteous cause. Let them say continually, let the Lord be magnified, which has pleasure in the prosperity of his servants. In the book of Deuteronomy chapter 8, the Bible tells us that God actually has given us the power to get wealth. If he didn't want you to have it, why did he give you the power to get it? He gave you the power to get it because he wants you to have it. In the book of Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse number 18, he said, but you shall remember that it is only the Lord your God, for it is he that gives you the power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he sware unto your fathers as it is this day. We now just have discovered the purpose for God's blessing. God doesn't want you to just go to church anymore. God wants you to rule the world that you live in. We're not wondering about Jesus coming back tomorrow. I have a sneaky suspicion or hunch or whatever you want to call it. Jesus isn't coming back for a while. And man, if you think things are bad right now, you wait. You wait. Well, no, I thought that you were just going to encourage me. I am. This is encouragement. You may not necessarily see it from that perspective, but I can tell you that's encouraging. It's almost kind of like the guy who's screaming at you saying, duck, duck. You say, well, why are you screaming at me like that? And then the guy just lost his head. And you say, well, I guess maybe we found out why. Well, you weren't encouraging me when you told me to duck. Because people go to church to be encouraged. They want to be encouraged in the midst of their misery. Well, we don't have to be miserable.
Amen.
Victory, championship, winning is a choice. It's a choice. That's all that it is. Well, how are you doing? Well, okay, under the circumstances. Well, what in the world are you doing there? Why are you under those circumstances? You don't have to be under those circumstances. I'll give you a story someday about the circumstances of life. You don't have to be under there. But the thing that I want you to do is I want you to know that you are a king. And you are a queen. Someone has attempted to take your crown. You have the power, the right, and the responsibility to get your crown back. And if you can get your crown back, it will change you. It will change the world in which we live. And you will set an entire nation, you will set this nation free. Because this nation needs freedom. We believe lies. We don't try to do the truth. We don't want to stand up for truth because we wonder how much it's going to cost us if we attempt to do so. So we just let people do whatever they want to do. May God help us. May God help us. Think of this. History would have never remembered the Good Samaritan had he been a pauper. No one would have ever heard of the Good Samaritan if he had no money. The only reason why that you hear of the Good Samaritan is because he was able to care for someone that didn't have anything. So this guy is walking down the street, and as he's walking down the street, some bandits come out, and what they do is they beat him to a pulp, they steal everything he has, and leave him half dead. So as he's lying half dead, can't move, can't go anywhere, what happens is that there is a Sadducee that comes and walks by him. Pretends like he doesn't see him and walks right by. Another priest, he goes to the other side of the street and continues to walk. But then there's this guy who really is of the three, he was the only one that knew God, who stopped and picked him up and put him on his donkey and took him to a hotel, fixed him up, cleaned his wounds, gave the innkeeper some money and said, let him stay here until he's better, and when I return, I'll give you all the rest of the money. The hotel keeper must have known who he was and said, I'll pay you back. Whatever it takes for this guy to make it, he's going to make it. And so the world would have never known him. If in fact that he didn't have anything. He couldn't tell the innkeeper, I'll pay for it when I get back. He couldn't tell the innkeeper anything. All he could do is he could just, like at best, he could pick him up and put him on his donkey, even if he had one, because that was a pretty good thing to have. And so we put him on his donkey and then take him over to the hotel, drop him off at the front desk and say, I don't know what to do with this guy. Do what you want. I thought I would just help him up because the religious people wouldn't have anything to do with him. So here he is. Hey, he's not my next of kin. So there's nothing I can do about it. You never would have heard of the Good Samaritan. But it's one of the most benevolent stories in all of this scripture. And with all of that in mind, I want to just tell you 4 things. Might be 5, I don't know. And how to change. And how to think about things the way God thinks about them. Because isn't it funny, as people get older, you know, when you're a child, you don't really have very much responsibility. During that time in your life, you get to dream and you get to think about all the wonderful things that are coming. You begin to get into your teenage years, and what you start doing is calculating how much money you'll be able to make by getting a part-time job. And then when you calculate that money, you spend it before you ever get it.
A paycheck is given to people who show up, but opportunities are given to people who work beyond what they're paid to do. Hire for attitude, train for success. Training does not fix what HR doesn't catch.
Jesus didn't write anybody off. Aren't you glad for that? Jesus was the ultimate optimist. He knew that just because somebody didn't have a good beginning did not mean that they could not have a great future.
If you are in the Chicago area, we would love for you to join any of our services. We have a 5 p.m. service on Saturdays, and on Sundays we have a 9:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. service. We also have midweek services on Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. at locations around Chicago and Northwest Indiana. To find out more about FHC, like us on Facebook or go to our website at fhclife.org. To partner with RTM, visit robthompson.org/partner or call our office at 708-614-6000. We look forward to seeing you very soon.